Thank you for joining the Jane Norris Show, Louisville's only live talk show. Jane will be back tomorrow. I'm Dawne Gee. And we are talking about the problems in gangs. This weekend was just very terrible because we lost one man to death, possibly because of gangs, and another man in a drive-by shooting. I never thought in Louisville we would hear that, but we've heard it too many times. Now, I was talking to my guest, Three Addison, who's here, a youth leader, and you do so many things with youth, but he said something to me that I have got to share, and that is, I was telling him how, telling George how I stay on my kids, and I tell them, when you leave the house, you tell me where you're going, and you tell me how long you're going to be gone, and who you're with, and you said to me that my kids are teens now.
Yeah, and you have to temper that so that they can always remain confident in your choices and your decisions. Anything more than that would be pretty much taken as criticizing or harassing. So
I got to give them a chance to make their decisions.
Or you open up the doorway for those peers to come in and really influence your kids. And I think that in many cases that's where a lot of parents actually lose their children.
So let them grow up.
Yeah, you have to do that, and I know it's fearful with all the stuff that's going on.
It is so fearful. You don't know.
But well, yeah, I'm a father of a daughter, so
I've met your daughter, and she's beautiful. You're stressed too. We're all stressed. What do we do?
But you have to really work on yourself. I think that if a lot of the adults, a lot of times I go to these events that are supposed to be designed towards gangs, and the number one thing that's missing are the kids that they're supposed to be targeting. And I think that if the parents of many of those kids, because after a while if your kid is part of the problem or the solution, if they got a hold of their children and actually came down and participated in some of these functions, then we'd probably have a lot greater success a lot quicker. But as it stands right now, we don't seem to have that visible representation at these events. There's always the little children, there's always the older people, and the ones that you're targeting are normally absent.
All right, we're going to talk about that as well. Let's take a call from Tracy in Jeffersonville. Hi, Tracy.
Hi.
What's your comment?
I have a comment about the party that all these kids were at. Number one, where were the adults with 200 kids in the backyard? And number two, somebody had to see what happened. If they didn't want to come up face front to a policeman, write on a piece of paper and mail it to them. There are so many ways they can go anonymous with it.
I agree, Tracy. I'm not sure if the adults were there and 200 folks. They say they didn't invite that many, but I guess that's how a party gets started. But I totally agree with you. Why can't somebody make an anonymous call? Because if we don't do anything, then nothing's ever going to get done.
Well, I like to just basically say that even though you think in terms of anonymous, no one knows anything, too many times people have given anonymous tips only to be found out that they gave those tips and it cost them their lives. So, we assume a lot, and a lot of times we assume that everything is the way it appears to be, and with law enforcement sometimes they can't always guarantee your safety. And I think that in this day and age when kids see people have no respect for law and order, they really have to wrestle with that choice. So I wouldn't judge too quickly. I think that eventually someone is going to give up these guys, but I wouldn't say, well, if it was me, I would do this, because unless you're ready to die today, then you really don't need to be out in the streets. I work with kids, but I've pretty much said, well, if it happens to me, it happens, and many people know that I'm sincere about that, and I don't want to leave any more than anybody else. But unless you're really to make that commitment, ready to do it, I wouldn't criticize anybody else who hasn't chose that path, because it takes a lot of courage.
Right, you're right. I am not in those shoes. I'd like to think that I would say something. Then again, I'd like to be, like to think that I would be in a place where that wouldn't happen, but it happens almost anywhere anymore. That is so scary. John, in Louisville, you say some laws need to change?
Yes, I think they need to change the juvenile laws in the state. Haven't been changed in 50 years or so.
Juvenile laws, as in if they do something that that's an adult action, they should be charged as an adult?
Well, you've crossed that line. Once you take somebody's life or threaten to take somebody's life, you've crossed that line. You stepped into the adult world.
I don't know how old you are, John, with that deep voice. You sound relatively older. I would say that back in our day, things like this didn't happen. Do you have any idea where in the world we're going wrong?
It's dysfunctional families. It's dysfunction in the family of the children. Nobody's looking into the school situation. You have a curfew that's really not being enforced. You have there is no way to keep kids in school. You need more social workers in the state in order to go into some of these homes. These are long-term problems. You can't have short-term answers. You can't blame the police department because the court system's not keeping these kids in a situation like a boot camp or jail or whatever has to be done. This is a long-term problem. Now, when you're talking about gangs, my perception of that is the gangs are soldiers of the drug dealers. These kids are fighting over drug turf. They're not fighting over colors or the things that we think they're fighting over. These kids are fighting over who's going to sell drugs on what corner.
All right. Well, John, I personally think the kids are confused and don't have a clue what they're fighting for, because if it were drugs or colors or anything else, they wouldn't be doing it. It's that simple. So where are we going wrong?
Well, it's not just the parents. It's not just the courts. It's the educational institutions. It's the businesses that don't employ and create co-ops and stipend opportunities for these young people who don't have degrees. I mean, you know, we have to look at the individual. Now, if you really want to start making a change, as Michael Jackson once said in a song, you have to look at the man in the mirror. You have to start with yourself and ask yourself if you're honestly doing everything that you can do within your power. If that's no more than spending 1 hour a week with a kid that you know, maybe next door neighbor, someone who has less, or some kid that you see is at risk, and spend some time to try to give them that path and direction, that's more than enough, because if people do it collectively, then we've all touched everybody in the society we need to touch. What's going on is that a lot of people who are tired and frustrated still haven't been motivated to act. They're still waiting for someone to come and say, this is the game plan, when I think inherently all people know within themselves the game plan rests with them. What do you actually have in your power that you can do to start impacting somebody's life right away? We don't have to wait for the mayor. We don't have to wait for a lot of other people, but you have to decide that you're ready to commit yourself to do that.
All right. We'll talk more about that. We'll take more of your calls, 571-JANE, 1-888-800-9283. We'll be right back.